Welcome back to the weekend edition of Daily Dose of Hebrew. We're continuing our study today through 1 Samuel 3. We're looking specifically at the Masoretic accents. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you've been around for a long time, welcome to you as well. Be sure to tell your friends and colleagues about Daily Dose of Hebrew. Our desire here is to see pastors and scholars stay active in their Hebrew Bibles for life. And so if you know someone who could benefit from these videos, pass along the good word. We would greatly appreciate that for sure. Without further ado then, let's get started today. Let's read the Hebrew together and then we'll nail down a solid translation for the day. Let's read this together. Vayikra Adonai el Shemuel Vayomer Hineni. For an overall translation here, this verse is fairly straightforward. We get, "And the Lord called to Samuel, and we have now Samuel as the subject, and he said, Behold I." Or if we smooth it out into English, we would say, "Here I am," or "Here am I," something of that nature. And 1 Samuel 3:4 begins with the Vav consecutive form of kara. It's a call imperfect 3ms. Notice here that the thematic vowel for kara as an A in this case, a long kametz. With the guttural in the third root letter position, we can expect a vowel change in the thematic vowel position. This is one of our, quote, weak verbs. And typically with an R3 aleph, we would expect a change to an E vowel. And in fact, in the call imperfect feminine plurals, both the second and third person feminine plural, that is what we get. However, in the other call imperfects, we get the A vowel as we have it here. Here, the A thematic vowel lengthens to a long kametz because the aleph has quiesced and the theme vowel lengthened by compensation. We would have originally had a patach. Remember that Hebrew syllables are closed because they end in a silent schwa, not because they end in a consonant. We teach it that way early on but for simplicity, but really syllables are closed because they end in a silent schwa. So here, the final syllable on vayikra would have been closed with an implicit silent schwa under the aleph. However, when we get a silent schwa under the silent aleph consonant, the aleph often will quiesce completely, and the preceding vowel lengthens by compensation. Now, you may not have thought that far into the morphology of vayikra. You may not care, but if you did, then there you go. In 1 Samuel 3:4, the Lord is the subject of the first verbal clause. The Lord called. And we technically have a null direct object here. And by that I mean that what the Lord said or what the Lord called to Samuel is technically missing. We don't really know what he said to him. The prepositional phrase to Samuel here clarifies to whom the Lord was speaking, and it introduces what we might call the call of Samuel narrative as a leader of Israel. The next verb is our standard vayomer, and he said. Here, the subject is now Samuel speaking in reply to the Lord. Vayomer is one of our R1 aleph special case verbs, and we get the preformative vowel of the call imperfect 3ms, changing from a hirik to a holum, and then the aleph again quiesces, as we've seen before. The theme vowels in the R1 aleph special case verbs, they dissimulate in different scenarios. In this case, we have a vav consecutive. It's a non-pausal form. And so the vowel dissimulates to a segol. And Samuel's answer, "Here I am," is literally "behold me," as we mentioned earlier. It's the particle hine with a 1cs pronominal suffix on it, hineni. Now that we have the translation and some morphology in mind, let's look at the accents. Notice first that the verse is so short that there is no athnach. This verse consists only of the saluk segment. Remember that the saluk is the near subordinate disjunctive accent to the sof pasuk, and it has the same, we may say, weight as the athnach. And we don't usually give it much attention because it always falls on the word directly preceding the sof pasuk. The athnach, however, which again we don't have in this verse, it moves around in the verse, and so it can carry a bit more meaning. If we want to put the word meaning in quotations, it can carry a bit more meaning than the saluk. And the next set of accents that we want to look for are the near and far subordinate disjunctive accents for the saluk segment. So now that we've narrowed it down to the saluk, let's look for those near and far subordinates. The near subordinate is the tifka here. And again, this verse is so short that there is technically no far subordinate accent, and we're going to see there aren't any on any level. The typical far subordinate disjunctive accent for the saluk would be the zakef, and we've seen that before, but again, we don't have it here. The next disjunctive accent that we have, though, is the tebir here. And the tebir is technically on the next tier down in relative strength compared to the tifka. You may look at your bookmark for your BHS to see those relative strengths. Again, since this verse, though, is so short, the far subordinates are unnecessary at each of those tiered levels. So regardless of near and far and all of our Sesame Street Grover talk that we have going on here, let's look at how these accents can help us break down the verse into clauses. Clear a few things away here. The tebir that we still have here marks off our first verbal clause with the verb and subject as one unit. The darga is the conjunctive accent that combines the verbal element with the subject in this verbal clause. And these accents together show that these words should be translated together before moving on to anything else. The next heaviest disjunctive accent is the tifka here, and it adds in the prepositional phrase and sets off the whole first clause from Samuel's answer in the last part. So we know that syntactically then, these segments are all one clause before moving on. So we would say, and the Lord called to Samuel. And the final segment is the saluk segment with the merikah, marking the conjunctive between the verb and Samuel's direct speech. With this final segment, we can see that Samuel's answer is set off syntactically from the rest of the sentence as well. Again, as a final translation, we could go through each clause separately, and we have, and the Lord said to Samuel, and he said, here I am. And that was a short one for today, but thank you for joining us, and until next time, shalom.